This is a technical introduction to the new features in Interform400 and InterformNG version 2015. Here the agenda. First, a short intro for the main headlines that you could put on these new versions of Interform400 and InterformNG. Then I'll go through first Interform400 with a PowerPoint presentation describing the main new features, and then I'll go a step deeper and go into the details and refer to the manual and some examples of what you can use this for. I'll do the same for InterformNG afterwards. But first, if I should give a headline of this year version of the two products, I would say the main feature is Signpad, that we now have the full Signpad support, full documentation, and there's also new functionality related to the Signpad. Apart from that, we have new SQL functionality in both. It means that we can call SQL to add additional database information into a new spoof file for Interform400 or a new XML file for InterformNG. Apart from this, I would say that for Interform400, the main new feature is the Concat feature, where we're able to concat multiple elements. And for InterformNG, I would say we have a new web interface and also a new PCL engine that makes a difference. So first, Interform400. The Signpad module was introduced last year, but now we have added a bit more functionality. You install a Signpad client on a Windows PC, and on that Windows PC you have a Signpad connected through a USB port, and this client communicates with Interform400 installed on an IBM I, where we're running a subsystem running a job that communicates with this client. So for the signed PDF file, you can choose to print, create PDF files, archive it, or email this new signed document. On the host, we will run the communication through a specific subsystem that might be sign inter or term inter, depending on if you have a new installation or an upgraded version of Interform400. The actual signing can be selected through either a specific command, sign PDF file command, or you can trigger this signing through the email finishing definition. And that's the new feature of the 2015 versions, that you tell Interform in the email finish definition that you want to sign the PDF file, and then in the P function, when we are actually generating the email, then we are doing the signing, and there you refer to the actual Signpad to be used. And even this P function has been extended to actually be able to print this new signed PDF file. If you want to use the Signpad for other functionality, what you need to do is to create the PDF file first and then call the sign PDF file command. We have a couple of important additions to our designer. Previous versions of Interform could only have one condition on each element, and that condition can be like this: greater than, less than, equal, not equal, and so on. But with the 2015 versions, you can actually combine these conditions with up to 4 elements. So in this case, I've chosen true to verify if some text found in a spoof file is within a given interval. With the conditions, we're able to scan an interval of lines, and you may notice that the positions that we're referring to here, or the conditions that we are referring to here, they are conditions that should be true for the same spoof file line. So one example where we can use this functionality is to check if a value found in a spoof file is within a given range, and this is an example of exactly this test. The addition of these multiple conditions is something that we have added into the remap window the tabulator and the conditioned overlay, all of the existing elements where you can use conditions, and also on the brand new Concat element. And the Concat element is described here. So the Concat, well, you can think of it first of all like a text element that you can combine multiple text from the spoof file with text constants, and then you can build up a long string of text, and that can be presented in a specific position in your output, either as a normal font or as a barcode. And we are thinking especially of barcodes when we are talking about, or when I'm talking about this new feature. For example, for some of our 2D barcodes, you might want to insert some low hex ASCII codes, which is actually an unprintable character. And if you combine this with a specific setting in your 2D barcode, then you can use this sequence, for instance, to add the hex character 05 into the barcode that you're scanning. To describe this format, you have here a description for your own use that won't be added into the output. And then you can set up here a field, so we have individual fields that we're using here to combine the complete barcode. And we can say, well, a specific field can actually also be conditioned, and if the condition is never true, then of course this field cannot be found. And if we say that for this concat the field is required, then the complete barcode or complete text will not be generated. If we say that it's no, then just this element of the prefix or suffix and the spoof file data will not be included in the resulting barcode or text. Here we have for a prefix, so that's a text constant added just prior to the spoof file data, and you can set up a prefix length, and if that's longer than the length of your prefix, then it will be padded with blanks. For the suffix, that's of course text that we're adding at the end of our detail element directly after the spoof file data. We can even combine these spoof file texts not only with conditions, but we can also have different sources. You can think of the spoof file either as the complete spoof file where we refer to a specific line number, but you can also use these concat elements within a conditioned overlay. So it means that you have, as the source, you can say that the spoof file line should be found relative to this conditioned overlay. So inside of the conditioned overlay, you can also refer to some lines that we have specifically selected for that overlay. So I would say with this functionality, you have a very advanced feature to dynamically build up a barcode. And with that in mind, I would say that you would normally no longer need to call a user program to build up the complete contents for a barcode, or consider to adapt your spoof files for Interform400 to make it possible to actually build up these special strings inside of that. We have several new features for emailing, and one of those is the ability to specify multiple email receivers. So, for example, when you find the email receiver in the spoof file, you can now specify the receiver delimited by a semicolon. So you just select the start position, and Interform400 will grab that text, and it will take up to 9 receivers, and it will keep on doing that until it will meet a blank character. So you can use this functionality both for a normal receiver and also for a carbon copy receiver. This has been implemented all the way through, so it's also implemented on the email finishing definition if you're using a key. You know perhaps this internal table of email addresses, or if you find the email receiver via a user program, and we have a new demo source to show you how to select these new CC receivers. We have added the new functionality for email commands as well. So for that respect, we added a new send EML command, which does the same as the old send email and send mail command, except that we are now able to send the email up to 10 normal email receivers and 10 carbon copy receivers. Another feature is that we are now able to send out the emails through multiple mail servers or SMTP gateways, and you can let Interform400 select that gateway or mail server depending on whoever is the sender's email address. So the email address, you can either select that through the domain of that sender's email address or the complete email address, like so. And this feature we expect is quite useful for customers that are consolidating multiple installations, or customers that have some subsidiaries running on the same machine. So you might want to have different settings depending on who sends out this email. An extra feature here, when you're starting to do a new email distribution, you might want to verify the emails that you have generated before you actually send them out. With the older versions of Interform, it is possible to set the email to register only, which means that the emails won't go out, but that is like a global setting, so no emails will go out. So normally you would want the normal production emails to go out, but you would want to test this new functionality first. So that's an option now that we have added to the email commands and to the P function for emailing with the email finish definition. So you see the option right here, hold email. So these new emails, they will be generated. You have the complete contents that are placed in your IFS, and you only need to go into work mail log, and there you can check out the email, and if you're happy with the contents, you can use option 1 to actually send the emails out. The final major feature of Interform400 is the ability to do SQL. So we have added the SQL opportunity in the split in the split definition. So that's added where you would normally define a user program, but now instead of a program, we call an SQL select where statement, and for that you can select up to 10 fields from your spoo file, and you can return up to 10 new fields into the new spoo file. Not only that, but you can also update some spoo file attributes, the output queue library, the form type, and the user data. So this is actually an SQL select where statement. So we are returning this text to put that into the spoo file, and that is a field from our database. This is the database and the library of that. And here we have our where statement to compare the field in the database with one of the values that we have found in the spoo file. So they are referenced as asterisk v1 to v10. If you return different spoo file attributes, like I've done here for the form type, then you will get multiple spoo files as the result of this split. We have chosen to ensure that the SQL statement that you do here is a select where, so there's no risk of making an update of the database if someone defines something wrong here. We have also chosen that what we want here when you do the SQL statement is that we want a single record only. So if you do a select where statement that selects multiple records, then you will get an error message. Let's take a look at the new manual. As usual, we have a complete list here in the manual of the new functionality. So the first one is that we are able, of course, to generate PDF-A output when you're generating PDF files. And we are actually, unless you're embedding any files in PDF, we are always generating a file that is PDF-A to be compatible. But we had a customer that specifically wanted this PDF file to claim that it was only 3B compatible. So you have an option in Interform400, a configuration option, to say that the PDF file should actually only be generated as 3B. Another feature is our PDF file naming definition, and let me show you that. So if you go into for finished definitions, and we have PDF file definition here, and here through option 3 you define the path and the file name that you want to create. So on that you have a replace file method. You can choose to never replace the file that already exists, so you will get an error message if it already exists. You can say option 1, it's okay to replace. And for the previous versions of Interform, we had the option G, which is the same as option 2, append a number to the end. But unfortunately, the number will be added like so. And in my point of view, this is not not very good for anything. So instead we have added option 3, generate, where you can generate a counter like this to ensure that you keep the extension. So Windows applications, for instance, will actually recognize this to be a PDF file. So that was one of the new features. We have for ZPL, especially for ZPL, I have a couple of things that I would like to point out. So if we go back to Interform and into the configuration, then I need to go through some screens. Just bear with me a bit. So first of all, this screen is something that we added to the 2014 versions of Interform400. There was a change by Zebra, so they chose to only support the prefixes that you actually state in the configuration of the printers. Previously they had actually two sets of command prefixes, where one was fixed, but that is now past. So you need to do the same for Interform400 here, to ensure that the command prefixes that you enter here, they must be exactly the same as you have configured on your printers. So so prior to doing an upgrade, if you do an upgrade from a 2013 or earlier versions of Interform400, you need to verify if these command prefixes are the same as what you are using on your printers. And if they're not, you won't be able to print. The next screen here, well, Zebra, they had a change of the supported softfonts. So when we're talking about Zebra printers with the old firmware up to firmware 13, then they have one way of printing softfonts. With version 14, Zebra added a new way of downloading the softfonts, more efficient. And then with version 18, Zebra, they have taken the decision to say, well, we now only support the new way of downloading softfonts. So it means that for Interform400, we need actually to know what kind of softfont we need to send to the printer when you're printing. Because if it's a very old printer, then we need the old way of printing softfonts, and if it's a newer printer, then we definitely need the new way. So if you're setting here a Y for both, then of course you need to tell Interform which printers are old and which are new. And so we have added a specific menu option. If you do this, then this menu option will open. And let me just just show you here. So if I go back to the main menu, option 80, administration, and then we have option 8, printer control options, 5 output queues with old Zebra firmware, and here you add the output queues of the printers that are old with the old firmware, and these are the output queues you're merging to where the printer are really where the printers are attached. Goodie. Yeah, so we have some changes in the designer, and the first one is fairly small, I would say. Normally when you create a new overlay, you see immediately the complete spoof file in the result, but now we can choose to start with a font that we call none, so it means everything just becomes blank. Apart from that, we have now the ability to support up to 4 conditions, and let me show you that. I have prepared a little example here. So for instance, in a remap window, we have chosen to look at this 4-digit number in the spoof file, and now we can say that we want to remap the complete text here depending on whatever number we find in this position. So we're using this double condition, and we can of course combine them not only with AND but OR, and we have implemented full logical Boolean algebra, so you can combine these 4 conditions in the way that you want. So if we're looking at the spoof file here, well, for this specific page, the condition is not true, as 1004 is of course outside this range. So if we look at the other pages of the spoof file, you may notice here for the very last page, we have 1003, which of course is a valid expression here, and then we are remapping that line. Then we have the Concat. Let me show you that. So for the Concat, we have, like I mentioned earlier, the ability to also add conditions, so you can scan interval of lines for specific text, and you can combine these conditions up to 4. But not only that, but that's what you can do for condition-wise on the header. And here on the header, you can place, or of course you need to place the text somewhere in the result. You select a rotation and a font or barcode to be used. And inside of this Concat, you can now build up the complete string of text that you want to output, and these individual text can be added either through here for the Concat. You can add a new Concat detail line with this icon, and also inside of the individual lines you can add new ones here. So for each of these lines we can refer to the spoof file data, so that's what I've done in this case. And also here you can use your conditions to scan several lines for a specific condition, and then when that condition is true, well, then we are considering this expression. So I have a description of this field for my internal use. I've chosen here to add this prefix, so this will be added just prior to the 1003, and I haven't any suffix. The data that I'm taking from the spoof file can be trimmed, so you can choose if you want to remove leading or trailing blanks from the text that you're taking here from the spoof file. The individual lines that make up the complete text, well, you can change the sequence of those with these arrow keys, like so. Currently, the result of the Concat is not shown in the result view. We hope that this will be made possible before the official release. But as usual, you can use the preview options to verify exactly how the actual output will be. Yeah. A minor feature that we can now let Interform400 calculate the checksum digit for an EIN barcode if you're going with PCL PDF. For emailing, I mentioned these several new features. So first of all, for the email finish definition, let me go back to the main menu, work with autoforms control, finish definitions, and if we look into a table, then when you change or add a new receiver, then for each receiver you can have not only an extra normal email receiver but also an extra CC receiver, and that of course is up to 9. For the if you want to specify the receiver in the spoof file, then of course you can do that with these delimited by semicolon. I have prepared a spoof file to show you, which looks like this. So you can see you have the individual email addresses, and that can be both for normal receivers and for carbon copy receivers, with the delimited with a semicolon. The new send EML command is the one to use instead of the old send email and send mail commands. The old commands are of course still supported, but it makes sense to use the new command, as this can do all the old commands can do and more, and that is you have now 10 CC and 10 blind carbon copy receivers that you can state in this command. For the multiple SMTP gateways or email servers, well, I can show you here how to configure that. So if we go back to option 70, free configure email. So this screen looks more or less the same. You have F8 to configure the SMTP settings for that main or default mail server, but with F20, which is a new thing, you can set up this list. So say, well, depending on the email sender, you can now go one step deeper and say, well, then I want to use this mail server through this port with this user ID and password and so on for signing on to the mail server. Yeah, another addition for the hold option for the emails, that was of course implemented on the commands, but also on the P function here in autoforms control. So if we go in here, you see the P function to do the merge and actual sending of your email, and here you have the hold option. But there is another addition to the P function, which is here the print PDF. So if you want to not only email but also print out the attached PDF file, you can simply state the output queue and what kind of data stream you want to print out. So in the background we have the print PDF command, of course, to do this, and this was especially added because of the Signpad, because you have now a signed PDF file that you might want to distribute in another way than just email. If we go back, then I can show you a bit more about the Signpad, how it has been implemented. You have here for the complete output queue, you select which Signpad to use whenever you say you want to do signing. So you can just with F4 select that one, and that will be the one to use. For the actual communication between Interform and the Signpad, you need to configure the port number, and that is done through option 70 and 5. Configure Signpad. Here you have the port number. And not only that, you can also work with the subsystem through option 80, 40. So you can start and stop the subsystem. You can work with the Signpads that has been connected to the host for at some point. And then when the Signpad connects, it will register here with the serial number of the Signpad, but you can go in here and change the description or the name, and then you can refer to the Signpad through this more descriptive name. Yeah. So that was P function and the Signpad. Then we have the split function with the new SQL feature. So let me just go back to the main menu. 5 autoforms control, 3 split definitions, and 2 split. Well, it works here like in older versions, that you select whatever page you want to call for this function, and when you hit enter, you can now specify either a program or *SQL for doing an SQL statement. So for SQL, you can grab up to 10 pieces of information from your spoof file, referred to by this *v01 to 10, and then you can return up to 10 new text in the new spoof file. And please notice here that I have specified only 3 data, and that is in line 1, 2, and 3, all placed in position 1 in the spoof file. So because I've only filled out the 3, then when you hit enter, it will only ask for 3 parameters here. So this is the field from our database that we want to insert in this field. This is the database, and we have the where statement here. And this statement can be longer. If you press F10, you have more space to specify that. I mentioned these spoof file attributes, and in this case I'm updating the form type. So if we take a look at the result, let me just go back to an output queue and look into the contents. Then we have our original input spoof file, and here is one example where we have added line 1, 2, and 3 with data from our database, depending on the number found here. The text 2 we have added in line 2 is also inserted into the form type, so that's why you get different spoof files depending on what form type you have added to this. We have the export feature of Interform, and with the 2015 version we have of course added Concat, and we have added the possibility to have multiple conditions, and especially the Concat has made some changes that makes it impossible to export Concats into an older version. Normally, if you use new functionality in and export that, and you try to import it in an older version, then these new additions simply will be ignored. But if you try to import an overlay with the Concat in an old version, then you will get an error message. So that's why we have now a feature for the export where you tell Interform what version you want to export for, if it's the current or the previous. So let me just go in here and say when you want to create a new distribution, you have the target version. So current would be to any 2015 version or future version, and previous, well, some previous version. And if you're using Concat for that, then you will get a screen here telling you exactly which overlays that contains the functionality that you cannot export to the old version. Yeah, we found that IBM made a change for the functionality around enabling a user profile for using net servers. If you install some specific OS 400 PTFs, then you can no longer enable your net server user by doing a dummy change of that user profile. So the alternative is to use, for instance, iService Navigator, or you can use our command enable net server users. Another new command is called compare overlay. So if we go to a command line, I can show you what it does. CMP-OVL. So we type in one overlay and the file set, and another, overlay and the file set for that, and the result can either be on screen or into a spoof file. So we can see here in the bottom there were actually some differences. So if we look at the spoof file, we have first the header of the first overlay, the header of the second one, and here you can see the detail lines of the first overlay that could not be found in the second one, and then we have the lines from the second one that weren't found in the first one. Yeah. Another command, transform XML file. This is something that has been greatly inspired by InterformNG. So with this command you can take an input XML file, call or use a XSLT style sheet to create a new transformed XML file, and you can even define a file with some SQL statements to completely change or add information from a database. This actually concludes all the new stuff in the 2015 version of Interform400. Apart from that, there are as usual a couple of extra things in the manual, and one of the things that I've done this time is to describe the margins. So when you're printing PCL, you have like a fixed margin of 6 millimeters around the edge that is unprintable, and it has some effect on the elements that you insert for printing. So for instance, if you insert a frame in the designer that is crossing this unprintable line, then in PDF it will look fine, but in PCL you may notice that for instance a frame will be some distorted because it will move the elements of the frame right until they actually fit into the printable area. Yeah. So apart from that, the manual also has a link to the cookbook, as there has been some additions to the cookbook lately. Yeah, that concludes the presentation for Interform400. So let's move on to InterformNG. For InterformNG, we also have full support of the Signpad. So InterformNG can of course be installed on an AS400 or whatever server you want. It can even be installed on the same Windows PC where you install the Signpad client. For the printing, if you want to print the signed PDF file, you can only print in PostScript. And apart from that, you can of course choose to archive or email this new signed PDF document. For the web interface, there are several new great features. One of them is that the new web server starts up in a few seconds instead of a few minutes. You can display the log files directly from the web interface. We have a new export feature, so you can export your designs, your templates, and you can include any referenced resource. You can define user-defined metadata keys in the web interface and use them in the drop-down list for instance, for the workflow. If you do any change in the web interface and you forget to save those, you will be warned if you go to another page, like the warning screen on the lower right. When it comes to browsers, then it's free of choice, except that we found for Microsoft Internet Explorer there's a limitation that you need to use version 9 or later. Inside the web interface you will see that options have moved, and especially for the workflow it's a different way of configuring that, so you need to remember to right click the various columns to add new lines. So to add a new rule, you right click on the rule and say if you want to add copy or delete. Same for your conditions. If you want to add or change a transformation setup, you click or double click in this area. Actions, you can do right click here as well, and for metadata of course also to specify what kind of output you would want. For the printed output we have a new PCL engine, and it simply generates much smaller PCL output, and because of that it simply prints faster. And the reason why it's so much smaller is mainly that the data that we need to generate barcodes is now much smaller, and also that we're using macros extensively, so the actual size of the printed result or the data stream that we send to the printer is comparable with what you know from Interform400, so it's very efficient now. The paper type, well, you can select the drawer on your printer when you print through a PCL drawer number, which is not that good normally, so we have the alternative of the paper type, like you know from Interform400, so you just need to configure on the printer per drawer what kind of paper type you have. We have added an immediate option inside the page style for the paper type and the duplex option to make it possible dynamically to change either the drawer or duplex. And one example is that you perhaps print a complete document and then you want some terms and conditions on the back of the final page. So while printing the front of that final page, we found that oops, this is the last page, or actually the page before last, because we're adding some terms on the back. So the front of the page should also be in duplex, and of course the terms will be printed on the back of that. For printing, well, we support both PCL and PostScript, but we have chosen to develop only the PCL output. So for PostScript we are not supporting duplex or drawer selection. Like for Interform400, we're able now to call kind of a recipe or a script to add database information into a new XML file. Previously, if you wanted to add extra data to the XML, you needed to have some extra fixed XML files laying around where we could do a lookup. And to specify the SQL statements, you create an exent file in the transform directory of InterformNG to tell Interform which file to include and what information from that file you want to include in your XML. Another addition, you can call a user program or a script each time that you're creating a PDF file. That is what we are using internally when you use Interfax together with InterformNG on the IBM I. If you want to interface InterformNG with another fax solution or an archive solution, if you're not using InterArchive, then you can create a script, and that script will get the complete PDF file, the path and the PDF file name, and any metadata that you have defined during processing will be included in a XML structure, so you can find out everything as good as anything about this PDF file, and that is information that you can use, for instance, for indexing, or to include a fax number that you want to use for faxing. Inside the designer, we have added a new construct folder to the page element, and this gives you the ability to describe some attributes of the page that you are just about to create. So it could be the page size, flow settings, and there will come an example later to show you exactly where that comes in handy. This covers the main features, so let's take a look at the manual for InterformNG. As I mentioned earlier, we have added a new web interface to InterformNG. So let's take a look at that. It looks like this. So you may notice here that the settings that we have placed on the general system has changed a bit. Another new feature of the web interface is that we have the metadata keys, where you can define your own metadata keys by pressing create, and you can delete them with this one. Apart from that, you can also do additional configuration. For instance, in the input plugin here, input file system, you can say if you want to delete or clean up the old processed XML files. As default, the processed XML files will be deleted after 24 hours, but you can choose either to completely stop this deletion or say that they should be allowed to be several days old. Another addition here is that we had a very special situation at a customer that had many tens of thousands of XML files laying around in a monitored folder, and then they started up the service, and the service immediately starts to copy all of those files into the processing directory, and that was quite a big task. So that is why you can here limit the number of XML files you want to copy into processing at a time. And another feature is that is something that I can describe the best if I first show you the contents of the directories here that we are monitoring. So InterformNG is monitoring this XML inbox directory for new XML files. You copy the XML files to this directory, then they are put into processing while they are being processed, and then when the processing is done, the XML files are moved on to processing. So the files are placed here in processing, and then if you end the server, or you stop the processing service right in the middle of processing some files, then some of these files that you see here might be partially done. You might have chosen to both print and archive the files, and we have perhaps archived them only but not printed them, or perhaps we were completely done but we were just in the process of moving the XML file into the processed directory. So the question is, what should happen with these files that are perhaps partially handled if you have a restart of your service? So as default, we will say, well, we want to put them into a different folder and rename that, so that you can manually decide what to do with each of these individual XML files. And that new folder will be renamed like this. So you have the current you have the current date and time, and then you need to go in there and check out the files. The alternative is to select Move Unprocessed Files Back. So it means that any files that are still placed in the processing directory will be moved back into the inbox, and they will be processed again from scratch. Yep. I covered the fax output. That's something that you can use on the IBM I, and if you're running on another platform, you need to use another fax solution. For For archiving, we have the possibility to create an extra index XML file with the information that you would probably want to use in your archive to build up an index of the PDF file when you move it into the archive. And that's something that we already have here through a text element. That on the text element you can set up a node here for the index label, and that will be a node in the index XML file. But sometimes you don't want this data that you're using for archiving to be visible in the output. It could be that this information is perhaps confidential, or you simply don't want to mess up the output with this information anyway. So for those situations, you add this index field, and for the index you specify the node in the index XML file, and here the data that you want to use for the archiving. So that can be a constant, can be information from the XML file, and so on. You can call a user program, a user script for each PDF file, as I mentioned, and then the PDF files that we are generating, they are now PDF A3B compatible, unless you are embedding files into the new PDF file. And if you do that, then we won't create a PDF A file, and just be a normal PDF. For the PCL output, as I mentioned, we have a new PCL engine, and that's something that you can configure right here in the web interface. So you say either to use the older PCL engine, and if you disable that, you can switch to the switch to the new one, and then save your settings and restart the processor service, and then you're running with the new PCL engine. We have some additions that are shown in the designer. So that was on the page style. We have, as I mentioned, the paper type. So you can select it right here, and you have the duplex option, and with both of these have this immediate feature. And like I mentioned, we have this example here where you have a lot of detail lines, and now finally we find that we are at the end of all the detail lines. So the next page should be the back of the current page with the terms and conditions. So it's only at this point, when we find out that we don't have enough detail lines to make another page, that we find, well, this current page should actually be printed in duplex. So that's why I've inserted this page style to dynamically trigger duplex, say it should be immediately active for this page, and then the next page will be, as I mentioned, the back of the current page printed in duplex. PostScript, yeah, we can still do PostScript, but if you want the new features, you should go with PCL. And you can do lookup in a database with this SQL statement, exactly like you can do with the Interform400. For the graphical designer, there are some extra features. For instance, like I showed you with the metadata in the web interface, you can also here for your designer, you can set up some metadata keys and variable values, and then you can see how your design would react to different values. And not only that, but for the metadata keys, you can actually use them for conditions, for printing, and so on. I've used that here for a text element to see, well, the new thing is here that you want to use a metadata, and this metadata is one of the keys that we have defined here. So that's this one. So in this case, I have assigned the value archive, so that's why this is what it will actually print on the output. This list of metadata keys and values are stored locally on my PC, so I can reuse it for different designs. The construct folder, well, I have the other example to show you that. That was actually created to help a customer with a very specific problem, that they wanted a payslip on the very first page of the output. So they have some detail lines, and the margin, the bottom margin on the first page here, is set through the page style, bottom margin of 12 centimeters, so to make room for this. And then inside of the page element here, we have this new construct, and the construct is thought of as being a container mainly for changes to the page style. But the page style can be conditioned, so in this case I've conditioned it to be activated if the current page is larger than 1, and if that is the case, then we change the bottom flow margin to 1 centimeter, so it flows across the complete page. So here for the condition, I'm using a variable that I'm updating for each and every page to say, well, if it's larger than 1, then we want to change this margin. Yeah, there's been other additions or changes, improvements to the designer. When you insert a text element into a flow, you won't need to click in the result view or anything, you just type in the text that you want to add. So it makes it easier and faster to use. The Signpad module, there is a little detail I want to show you here in the web interface. So if you go into workflow and you want to activate a Signpad, you specify here for the output that the output time should be Signpad, and then you have a specific metadata key, interform.signpad.action, which tells what kind of output do you want. Do you want to archive, meaning PDF, email, print, or combination of multiple of those. Export, yeah, that is possible. So if we go here into the web interface and select tools, you select one or multiple templates, and if you select recursive, then any resource that the template is referring to, it could be other templates, images, translation tables, fonts, whatever, that's also included in the export. Makes it easier to replicate a scenario on another machine, or if you want to move copy an installation to another. You can view the log files from the designer. Let's simply click the log and you select what kind of log file you want to look at. That's it. So that's available both for the service logs and the web service logs. Specific story about iCloud solutions, I won't cover that here. If you want to add more information into the log files to trace what happens with a specific incoming file, then you can do that. That's also something I won't go that much into here. For Java, we support Java 1.8 now as well, and this also is the case for Interform400, so there's no issue here with that. If you upgrade from an older version of Interform, we have a conversion tool to handle conversion of the barcodes, but I assume the majority is now up onto a 2014 version now. For the XML files, you can have fields in your XML that are numeric or even date fields, and the format that you have in your XML file might not be the format that you would actually want in your output. So I've made these formulas to make an easier translation from an input format into a specific output format, both for numeric fields and also for date fields. These formulas can simply be copied into the designer and used, but I can also promise you that there will be improved functionality in InterformNG in the future, so that it will be easier to transform from a specific input format into a specific output format. Oh, sorry, I need to go back. Yeah, that was this. Yeah, we have a you can set up a configuration file to delete old log files. There's a description of the what we call template levels, something that you normally don't need to think about. But as with Interform 400, we are of course constantly adding new functionality into the product, and this new functionality is of course not backwards compatible. So we are keeping a trace of that. When you save a template, a design, then we keep some information stored into that to tell InterformNG which version is required to run this template without any problems. So that is helping you to avoid any problems when you're creating a setup, a configuration on one machine and want to port it to another. So as long as you're not using the new functionality, for instance the metadata keys in a 2015 version, then it's no problem to transfer your design to an old version. But only if you use the new functionality, then of course you cannot use it on an old version. We have even planned new functionality for next year, so if you will use that functionality in the future versions, then of course the template won't open in a 2015 version. Yeah. Yeah, and we are able to sort an input XML file. There's an example here in the manual how to do that. And finally, just for information, there were for previous versions a lot of small configuration files. We have now merged them all into one large file called settings.json, and that is what we are using in the web interface. So normally you change this configuration file through the web interface, so you won't need to think about this, but this is only for information. So this actually covers the full presentation. If you have additional questions, feel free to contact me or one of my colleagues or a business partner near you. Thank you. Goodbye.